The lake had always been there, long before fences, boards, or printed rules. It sat quietly between open fields and old trees, reflecting the sky like it had nothing to prove. People nearby grew up around it. Some learned to swim there. Others came early in the morning to fish or just sit by the water before work. It was never loud, never fancy, just part of everyday life. For decades, no one argued about who owned it. The understanding was simple. The land around it belonged to different people, but the lake itself was shared in practice. Farmers pulled water when they needed it. Families came on weekends. Everyone respected it because it had. It's always given back. Things began to change when the new housing development arrived. At first, it seemed harmless. A few machines showed up, then roads, then rows of neat houses that all looked the same. Most people didn't mind. Growth had come before, and life went on. But this time, the homes came with something else attached to them. A homeowners association. An HOA. The first sign went up near the gravel road that led to the lake. It was clean and bright, with bold letters that read private property, residents only.
Out.
People stopped and stared. Some laughed, thinking it was a mistake. Others felt uneasy but kept walking. No one confronted it right away. A few days later, more signs appeared. Near the trees, by the old dock, even on paths that had been used for years. The message was the same. The lake was no longer for everyone. The man who owned much of the land uphill from the lake noticed the signs early. He had lived there most of his life. He knew the land the way someone knows their own hands. He didn't rush out to tear the signs down. He didn't argue. He just watched. He had seen people come and go before. He had learned that those who make the most noise at the beginning often don't understand what they're dealing with. Soon, letters started arriving in mailboxes. Polite at first, but firm. They explained that the lake was now under HOA management, that access was restricted, that anyone entering without permission could face fines or legal action. Some older residents felt confused. Others felt angry. A few tried calling the number on the letter. But the answers they got were short and cold. One afternoon, a family was told to leave while they were fishing. The kids didn't understand why. Their parents argued, but a uniformed security guard stood firm. The family packed up and left, embarrassed and upset. Word spread fast. People began asking questions. Who gave the HOA this power? How could a group that arrived only months ago claim something that had existed for generations? The answers were always vague. The HOA board said they had documents. They said the developer transferred rights. They said it was all legal. Most people didn't know how to fight that. The man uphill did know something, though. He knew the lake wasn't natural. It never had been. Years ago, long before houses or paved roads, the land had been dry and uneven. The lake existed because of a dam. A solid, old structure built with care and patience. It held the water back, shaping the land into what everyone now enjoyed. And that dam sat on his property. He remembered helping his own father inspect it when he was young. He remembered learning why it mattered, how water rights worked, and why records were kept so carefully. None of that was public knowledge. It never needed to be. Until now. Meanwhile, the HOA grew more confident. They started planning events by the lake, private parties, exclusive gatherings. They spoke as if ownership was settled fact. Anyone who questioned them was brushed aside. One board member even joked at a meeting that the old locals should learn to adapt. The man uphill heard about that too, still. He stayed quiet. He walked the land in the evenings, listening to the water move through the dam the way it always had, steady, controlled, patient. He understood that rushing things could make them messy. He wanted clarity, not chaos. Other residents started coming to him for answers. They trusted him. He didn't promise anything. He just told them to stay calm and let things play out. The HOA didn't like his silence. They sent a letter directly to him, suggesting cooperation. The tone was polite but carried an edge. It implied that resistance would not end well. The letter mentioned lawyers and enforcement. He read it once and set it aside. What the HOA didn't understand was that power doesn't always come from titles or boards. Sometimes it comes from knowing the land better than anyone else and respecting the systems that built it. As the weeks passed, tension settled over the area. Conversations at stores grew quiet when HOA members walked in. Longtime neighbors avoided the lake, unsure of their rights. The water remained calm, but everything around it felt unsettled. The man uphill began gathering old files, deeds, surveys, water permits, documents that had been untouched for years. Each one told the same story, clearly and without emotion. The lake existed because the dam existed, and the dam had never changed hands. Still, this was only the beginning. The HOA believed the lake belonged to them. They had no idea how wrong they were. The change around the lake did not happen all at once. It crept in slowly, like a shadow that grows longer every evening. At first, people still came early in the morning, hoping no one would notice. A quiet cast of a fishing line, a short walk along the shore. But each day, the presence of the HOA felt heavier. A small booth appeared near the main access road. Then came a chain across the gravel path, unlocked but clearly meant as a warning. A guard started showing up more often, sometimes alone, sometimes with another person wearing the same uniform. They were not rude, but they were firm. They spoke as if they were repeating rules they fully believed in. People stopped arguing with them. Most just turned around and left. The man who owned the land uphill watched all of this from a distance. He heard the stories when neighbors stopped by or called in the evenings. An older couple told him they had been warned for sitting on a bench they had helped build years ago. A farmer said he was told to apply for written permission to draw water for his crops. The farmer laughed when he told the story, but his eyes showed worry. Still, the man did not act. He understood something many others did not. When people believe they are right, confronting them too early only makes them dig in deeper. The HOA board believed they were in control. Letting them grow comfortable in that belief would make the truth harder to ignore when it finally surfaced. The HOA began holding meetings more often. Flyers were posted on community boards and mailed to nearby homes, even those not part of the development. The language was formal and confident. They spoke about managed access, community standards, and long-term vision. The lake was presented as a feature, an asset, something to be organized and improved at one meeting. A longtime resident stood up and asked a simple question. How could the HOA claim ownership over water that had always been shared? The answer was smooth but empty. The board members spoke about developer agreements and legal transfers without explaining much. When pressed, he suggested that anyone with concerns should speak to a lawyer. That ended the discussion. The man uphill attended one meeting quietly, sitting near the back. No one recognized him as anyone important. He listened carefully. Every sentence confirmed what he already suspected. The HOA was repeating information given to them by the developer without fully understanding it. They had papers, but not the right ones. After the meeting, he walked home under a darkening sky. The sound of water moving through the dam reached him before he could see it. It was steady and familiar. He rested his hand on the old structure, feeling the vibration beneath his palm. It reminded him that some things did not change just because someone claimed they had. Over the next few weeks, the HOA tightened its grip. Fees were introduced for lake access, but only for non-residents. Cameras were installed near the shore. Notices warned against trespassing, listing penalties that sounded severe, even if they were rarely enforced. The mood in the area shifted. Neighbors who once chatted freely now spoke in low voices. Some people avoided each other altogether, afraid of being reported. The lake, once a place of calm, became a source of stress. The man uphill finally received another letter. This one was less friendly. It stated that part of his land might fall under HOA oversight due to water adjacency. The wording was careful but clear. They were testing boundaries. He folded the letter and placed it with the others. That evening, sat at his table and opened a worn folder. Inside were documents older than the development, older than the HOA, older than most of the people now claiming authority. Maps drawn by hand, a Official stamps faded but still readable. Clear descriptions of landlines, water flow, and responsibility for the dam. He read slowly, not because he needed to understand, but because he wanted to be certain. Every page confirmed the same truth. The dam was private. The water it held was regulated, but not owned by the HOA. Any control over the lake depended entirely on that structure. Outside, the lights from the development glowed brightly. The houses looked neat and organized, just as they were meant to. From the outside, it was easy to believe they represented order and progress. But order built on misunderstanding does not last. A few days later, the HOA hosted a large event by the lake. Music played. Tents were set up. Guests laughed and walked freely along the shore. Security stood watch, turning away anyone who did not belong. The man uphill watched from afar. He noticed something important. The increased activity put strain on the shoreline. Temporary docks shifted. Water levels fluctuated more than usual. Small changes, but enough to matter. That night, made a decision. He contacted a local official not to complain, but to inform. He explained the situation calmly, providing copies of documents. No accusations, just facts. The official listened closely and asked careful questions. Nothing changed right away. The HOA continued as before, confident and comfortable. They spoke openly about expanding their control, about future improvements, about how the lake would become a symbol of their success. The man uphill did not argue publicly. He did not threaten. He simply prepared. Neighbors noticed his calm and found comfort in it. When they asked what he planned to do, he gave the same answer each time. Let the truth do the work. The lake remained full and quiet, reflecting the sky as it always had. To most people, nothing seemed different, but beneath the surface, the balance was already shifting. The HOA believed the lake belonged to them. They still did not understand how much depended on the dam. By the time summer settled in, the lake no longer felt like a place people came to relax. It looked the same from a distance, but anyone who lived nearby could feel the tension in small ways. Cars slowed near the signs. Conversations stopped when security passed. Even the birds seemed quieter along the shore. The man uphill stayed steady. Each morning he walked his land, checking fences, paths, and finally the dam. He listened to the water as it moved through the gates, measured and controlled. He made notes in a small book, nothing dramatic, just times, levels, and weather. He had learned long ago that careful habits mattered. The official he had contacted earlier called him back. They spoke more than once after that. The tone was respectful, curious. Questions were asked about maintenance, responsibility, and permits. The man answered plainly. He shared copies of documents, old photographs, and survey maps. There was no anger in his voice, only patience. Not everyone appreciated that patience. The HOA board began to feel challenged, even if they could not yet explain why. They noticed that officials were asking questions. They noticed that their letters were being answered with silence. That silence made them uneasy. At the next HOA meeting, the mood was different. Voices were sharper. Someone suggested sending a formal notice to all surrounding landowners, reminding them of HOA authority. Another suggested increasing fines to discourage trespassing. The board agreed quickly, without much discussion. Within days, new letters went out. Neighbors brought the letters to the man uphill. Some were worried. Others were angry. The letters spoke of enforcement, of compliance, of consequences. They sounded official enough to scare people. The man read each one carefully, then handed them back. He told everyone the same thing. Do nothing. Keep records. Stay calm. His calm surprised people. Some wondered if he was underestimating the situation. Others trusted him because he had never led them wrong before. The HOA decided to push further. They hired a survey company to redraw boundaries near the lake. Bright flags appeared along the shore and near paths that had always been open. The flags felt like markers of conquest. People took photos and shared them quietly. The surveyors were doing their job, following instructions. When the man uphill approached them, he was polite. He asked what documents they were working from. They showed him copies provided by the developer. He nodded, thanked them, and said nothing more. That afternoon, he contacted his own surveyor, someone who had worked the land before the development existed, someone who understood how the lake had been created, not just how it looked now. A week later, two very different sets of flags stood near each other. The contrast was hard to ignore. Officials began to take notice. Questions became more direct. Requests for clarification landed on the HOA's desk. The board responded with confidence at first, but their answers grew longer and less clear. They leaned heavily on the developer's statements, repeating them again and again. The developer, however, had gone quiet as pressure built. The man uphill made another careful move. He scheduled a routine inspection of the dam. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Just maintenance, as had always been done. He informed the appropriate office ahead of time, provided dates, and shared his notes. Everything was by the book. Word of the inspection reached the HOA quickly. Rumors spread. Some said the lake might be drained. Others said access would be cut off. Panic crept in, fueled by guessing and fear. The man uphill did not correct the rumors. He did not encourage them either. He stayed focused on facts. During the inspection, small issues were noted. Normal wear. Seasonal adjustments. Recommendations were made, all reasonable. Nothing urgent, but enough to require attention. The report was filed properly. The HOA received a copy. They did not like what they read for the first time. The dam was mentioned clearly as privately owned. For the first time, the lake was described as dependent on that structure. The language was careful, but the meaning was impossible to miss. The HOA requested a meeting. The man uphill agreed. They met in a plain room with a long table. No cameras. No crowd. Just paperwork and quiet voices. The HOA representatives spoke first, explaining their position, their understanding, their plans. They spoke confidently, but there was an edge of uncertainty beneath it. When they finished, the man uphill slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of everything: deeds, surveys, permits, inspection reports. Each page told the same story from a different angle. The lake existed because the dam existed. Control of the dam meant control of the water, no? Threats were made. He simply explained how things worked. The room fell quiet. The HOA representatives exchanged looks. One asked if he was suggesting changes to the lake. He answered honestly. He said the dam would continue to be operated safely and legally, as it always had. He said he preferred cooperation over conflict. He said misunderstandings could still be corrected. The meeting ended without agreement. Afterward, the HOA board spoke publicly, downplaying the situation. They told residents everything was under control. They said rumors were exaggerated. They assured everyone that the lake would remain just as it was. But their confidence sounded forced. Behind the scenes, messages went unanswered. Calls were not returned. The developer remained silent. Officials increased their involvement. Neighbors noticed subtle changes. Security patrols became less frequent. Events were canceled without explanation. New signs stopped appearing. The man uphill continued his routine. Each day he checked the water levels and made small adjustments, all within approved limits. Nothing noticeable to most people. Just enough to prepare. One evening, as the sun set low, he stood by the dam and watched the water move. He thought about the families who had grown up here, the crops that depended on this water, the balance that had always existed when respect guided decisions. He did not want to harm anyone, but he would not allow the truth to be ignored by the end of the week. Officials scheduled a broader review. Notices were sent. The HOA was asked to provide full documentation supporting their claims. That night, the lake was calm and full. Reflecting the sky like a mirror, most people went to sleep. Believing nothing would change, they were wrong. The next phase was already in motion, and it would not be possible to ignore much longer. The notice from the officials arrived on a quiet morning. It did not sound dramatic. It did not accuse anyone of wrongdoing. It simply stated that a formal review of land use, water control, and access rights around the lake would take place. Dates were listed. Documents were requested. Cooperation was expected from all parties. The HOA board tried to appear calm. Messages went out to residents saying there was nothing to worry about. They explained that reviews were normal and that the lake would remain open as planned. Still, their words felt rushed, like they were trying to stay ahead of something they could no longer control. Behind closed doors, the mood was very different. Board members argued over emails and late-night calls. Some blamed the developer. Others blamed the surrounding landowners. A few finally admitted they had never fully understood how the lake was created in the first place. They had seen water, seen maps, and assumed ownership followed the shoreline. Assumptions are comfortable until they meet facts. The man uphill received the same notice. As everyone else, he read it once and placed it beside his records. He did not feel relief or satisfaction, only a steady sense that things were moving where they needed to go. In the days before the review, small changes became visible. Water levels shifted slightly, not enough for most people to notice at first. The shoreline looked the same, but docks sat a little lower in the water. Stones that were usually hidden appeared near the edges. Fishermen mentioned it casually. I'm sure if it was just the season. The man uphill knew exactly why it was happening. He was making routine, approved adjustments at the dam. Nothing outside regulations, nothing sudden. Just careful changes that followed inspection recommendations. The purpose was not to drain the lake, to demonstrate something important. The lake did not exist on its own. Everything depended on the dam. The HOA noticed the changes during one of their scheduled events. Chairs had to be moved. Equipment had to be adjusted. Someone complained that the lake looked different. Security was instructed to keep people away from certain areas. Questions spread fast. Residents asked the board what was happening. The board gave vague answers about maintenance and seasonal shifts, but the uncertainty showed. People could feel it. Officials arrived the following week. They walked the land slowly, taking notes, asking questions. They spoke to longtime residents, farmers, and nearby families. Stories poured out. How the lake had always been used. How no one had ever been stopped before. How things changed the moment the HOA arrived. When officials visited the dam, the man uphill met them there. He answered questions clearly. He showed maintenance logs and inspection reports. He explained water flow and responsibility without raising his voice. Everything matched the records. When officials asked the HOA representatives about their claim, the answers were less clear. Papers were presented, but they relied heavily on developer summaries rather than original documents. When asked about the dam, there was hesitation. That hesitation mattered. The review stretched over several days. During that time, the water level lowered just enough to become obvious. Paths near the shore grew muddy. Docks tilted slightly. Boats were harder to launch. Panic followed. Social media filled with rumors. Some said the lake was being taken away. Others blamed the HOA. A few blamed the man uphill. Though most did not know his role, the HOA demanded immediate answers. They requested an emergency meeting with officials and insisted the water be returned to normal levels. They argued that residents had paid for lake access and that changes were harming property values. The officials responded calmly. They explained that the adjustments were legal and within the rights of the dam owner. They explained that the HOA had no authority over the structure controlling the water. They explained that no permanent action had been taken. That was the moment things became clear to everyone in the room. The lake was never fully theirs. The HOA left the meeting shaken. For the first time, they realized their power depended entirely on someone they had ignored and dismissed. Residents noticed the shift immediately. Security patrols disappeared. Access restrictions loosened without announcement. Signs quietly came down overnight. People returned to the lake cautiously, unsure if they were allowed. No one stopped them. The man uphill watched families return. Children laughed near the water again. Fishermen stood at familiar spots. The tension eased, but the situation was not yet resolved. Officials released a preliminary statement. It confirmed that the dam was privately owned and legally maintained. It stated that the lake's existence depended on that structure. It clarified that the HOA did not own the water, had no right to restrict access without proper agreements. The statement spread quickly. The HOA board tried to respond, but their message sounded hollow. They spoke about misunderstandings and future cooperation. They avoided words like ownership. The developer finally broke their silence. They released a short statement distancing themselves from the HOA's actions. They claimed they had never intended for the lake to be controlled in that way. Few people believed them. The water level remained lower than usual, but stable. This time, the difference was impossible to ignore. The lake was no longer a symbol of HOA authority. It was proof of a mistake. One evening, the man uphill received a visit from a board representative. The tone was different now. Respectful, careful. They asked if the water level could be restored. He listened quietly. He explained that restoration would happen once clear agreements were in place. Agreements that respected history, law, and shared use. He made it clear that the lake was never meant to be a weapon, but it would not be used as one against the community either. The board representative agreed to bring the message back. That night, the man uphill walked to the dam again. He rested his hand on the cool surface and listened to the water. He thought about how close things had come to turning ugly, and how easily power could be misunderstood. He made another small adjustment. Stabilizing the flow, the lake responded quietly. By morning, everyone knew the truth. The HOA had never owned the lake, and the dam had made sure no one would forget it. The days after the truth came out felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful at first, just quiet in the way things are after a long argument finally stops. People moved carefully, watching to see what would happen next. The lake sat lower than it used to, calm and patient, as if waiting. Officials continued their work. More papers were reviewed. Final reports were written. Clear language replaced vague promises. It was confirmed in writing that the dam was privately owned and legally maintained, and that the lake depended on it entirely. Any future use of the lake would require cooperation, not control. The HOA received the final notice. A week later, it stated plainly that they had no ownership over the lake or the water. They were instructed to remove any remaining signs, stop collecting fees, and undo restrictions they had placed on access. Any agreements moving forward would have to be voluntary and lawful. The board members read the notice in silence. Some felt embarrassed. Others felt angry, though they no longer knew at whom. A few felt relieved that the fight was over. The confidence they once had was gone, replaced by the weight of their mistake. Residents noticed the changes almost immediately. The last signs disappeared. The booth near the road was removed. Security stopped patrolling the shoreline. The lake felt open again, even with the water level still slightly lower than before. People returned slowly at first. A man cast a fishing line from the old spot near the trees. A family walked along the shore, unsure if anyone would stop them. No one did. Laughter returned, cautious but real. The man uphill stayed out of sight during those first days. He did not want attention. He did not want praise. He only wanted things to return to balance. Once the final paperwork was complete, he made the call. He informed the officials that he would begin restoring the water level to its usual range. The process would be gradual, safe, and fully documented. Just as it always had been, they approved. Over the next several days, the lake began to rise, not suddenly, not dramatically. Just enough that people noticed familiar stones disappearing again. Docks straightened. Boats floated more easily. The lake slowly became what everyone remembered. People talked about it quietly, as if afraid to jinx it. At the same time, the HOA held a meeting open to all nearby residents, not just members. The tone was different now. No strong words, no bold claims. Just careful statements and apologies that sounded uncomfortable but honest. They admitted they had overstepped. They admitted they had relied too heavily on assumptions and incomplete information. They promised that nothing like it would happen again. Some people accepted the apology. Others did not. Most simply wanted to move on. The man uphill attended the meeting, sitting near the back as he had before. This time, people recognized him. They nodded quietly. No one clapped. No one stared. That suited him just fine. When asked if he wanted to speak, he declined. His silence said enough. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. The lake became shared again, not because of signs or rules, but because people understood what had almost been lost. Farmers drew water without fear of fines. Families picnicked along the shore. Neighbors greeted each other like they used to. The HOA adjusted its role. It focused inward, on maintaining homes and roads, instead of claiming authority over land it did not understand. The board changed members over time. New policies were written more carefully. The lake remained untouched by those changes. One afternoon, the man uphill walked the shoreline with a few neighbors. They talked about small things: weather, crops, children growing too fast. No one mentioned the conflict directly, but it was there in the pauses between words. They stopped near the dam. Someone asked him why he waited so long before acting. He thought for a moment before answering. He said that rushing would have turned neighbors into enemies. He said the lake deserved better than that. He said sometimes letting people see the truth for themselves made the lesson last longer. The neighbors nodded. As the sun lowered, the water reflected orange and gold. It looked the same as it always had, yet everyone knew it was different now. Not because it had changed, because people had. The HOA had learned that ownership is not claimed with signs and meetings. It is proven with history and responsibility. The community learned that silence does not always mean weakness. Sometimes it means patience. And the lake remained. What it had always been: a shared place held together by respect and protected by a dam that quietly reminded everyone where true control begins. Even after everything was settled on paper, the effects did not disappear overnight. Some things never do. The lake was calm again, but the people around it were still learning how to be calm too. Trust, once shaken, takes time to settle back into place. The man uphill noticed this in small ways. Conversations stopped when certain topics came up. Meetings ended early. People smiled, but carefully. No one wanted to reopen old wounds, yet no one wanted to pretend nothing had happened. He understood that feeling well. He continued his routine just as he always had: morning walks, quiet inspections, notes written by hand. The dam worked smoothly, the water flowing at a steady pace. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth announcing. That was exactly how he liked it. One afternoon, a group of newer residents from the development walked toward his land. They looked unsure, almost nervous. He saw them from a distance and waited. When they reached him, one of them spoke first. They said they wanted to understand. They explained that many of them had believed what they were told when they bought their homes. They had been promised access, beauty, stability. They did not know the history of the lake. They did not know about the dam. They admitted they felt caught in the middle. The man listened. He did not blame them. He told them the truth, simply and without bitterness. He explained how the land worked, how water behaved, and how responsibility mattered more than claims. He showed them the dam not as a warning, but as a lesson. The group stayed longer than expected. When they left, they thanked him. Not formally, not loudly, just honestly. Word spread. More people came, not to argue, but to learn. Some were longtime locals. Some were newer homeowners. The lake became a place for quiet conversations again. Stories were shared. Misunderstandings were cleared. The HOA noticed the shift. They were no longer the center of attention. And that, in its own way, was a relief. The board made another change. They created a small committee, not to control the lake, but to communicate. Its only purpose was to stay informed and to speak openly with those who actually managed the water, think and land. It was a modest step, but it mattered. Months passed. Seasons changed. Rain came and went. The lake rose and fell naturally within its safe range. No one panicked anymore when levels shifted slightly. People had learned that water moves. That movement does not always mean danger. One day, officials returned for a final follow-up visit. It was brief. They checked records, walked the dam, and confirmed everything was in order. There were no warnings, no corrections. Just a quiet acknowledgement that things were being handled properly. That acknowledgement meant more than any public statement ever could. The man uphill watched them leave and felt something loosen inside him. Not pride. Just relief. Later that week, a small gathering formed by the lake. No banners, no speeches. Just food, folding chairs, and familiar faces. Someone had the idea to bring everyone together, not to celebrate a victory, but to close a chapter. The man did not plan to attend, but he went anyway. People greeted him warmly. Some shook his hand. Others just nodded. A few said thank you. He accepted each gesture quietly at one point. A child asked him why the lake mattered so much. He thought for a moment before answering. He said the lake mattered because people depended on it, and because it reminded everyone that some things are bigger than ownership. The child nodded, satisfied. As the sun lowered, someone suggested taking a photo. Not of individuals, but of the lake itself. Everyone stepped back, leaving the water untouched in the frame. It felt right after that day. The story of the lake began to change. It was no longer told as a fight, but as a lesson. New residents heard it early. Longtime locals told it with less anger and more reflection. The HOA became a footnote in the story, not the focus. The dam remained where it had always been. Strong, quiet, unmoved by opinions. The man uphill grew older. As everyone does, he continued caring for the land, training others to understand the responsibility he carried. He made sure knowledge was passed down, not locked away, because he knew something important. The lake would outlast all of them. Only respect would decide. It's how it was remembered. And for the first time in a long while, respect had returned. The water reflected the sky, steady and clear. No signs, no chains, just a lake, and the quiet understanding of who truly protected it. Time has a way of softening sharp edges. By the time another year passed, the lake felt like it had always felt calm and familiar. The tension that once hung over the water was now a memory people talked about only when someone new asked questions. The man uphill noticed how icily people moved around the lake again. They no longer checked over their shoulders. No one asked for permission. Children ran along the shore without fear of being told to leave. It felt natural, the way it should have been all along. Still, he knew that lessons fade if they are not remembered. One morning, he received a letter from a nearby town office. It was polite and short. They were updating regional records and wanted to confirm details about the dam and surrounding land. Nothing urgent, just accuracy. He welcomed that. He gathered his documents again, the same ones that had settled everything before. He met with officials, walked them through the land, and explained the system in plain terms. They listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, updated their records accordingly. This time, there was no confusion. The updated records were shared publicly. Maps were corrected. Notes were added. Anyone who looked could now clearly see how the lake existed and who was responsible for its care. Transparency did what conflict could not. The HOA reviewed the updates as well. They did not argue. They did not challenge them. Instead, they accepted the clarity. The board even shared the information with residents, encouraging everyone to understand how the lake truly worked. It was a quiet but important shift. Around that same time, heavy rains came through the region. Streams swelled. Fields soaked up water. The lake rose higher than usual, though still within safe limits. People noticed in the past, such a change would have caused panic. Rumors would have spread. Accusations would have followed. But this time, something different happened. People trusted the process. They knew the dam was being monitored. They knew adjustments would be made if needed. They knew who was responsible. And they were right. The man uphill increased flow slightly, following standard procedures. He logged every change. The water responded smoothly. Within days, levels settled back to normal. No drama followed. That calm response did more to heal old wounds than any meeting or statement ever could. Later that season, the HOA approached him again. This time they came with a proposal, not a demand. They suggested working together on a shared guideline for lake use. Something simple, something respectful. No enforcement, no penalties. Just understanding. He agreed to review it. They worked slowly. Words were chosen carefully. Each line was discussed. The final version focused on safety, cleanliness, and mutual respect. Nothing about ownership, nothing about control when it was shared. Most people barely noticed. That was a good sign. Life continued. The lake hosted quiet mornings and loud afternoons. Boats drifted. Fish jumped. Seasons passed without incident. One evening, the man uphill sat near the dam with someone younger, someone he had begun teaching. They talked about water flow, maintenance, and responsibility. The younger person listened closely, asked questions, and took notes. The man knew he would not always be there, and that was okay. What mattered was that knowledge would continue as the sun set. The lake reflected the sky once more. It looked unchanged. But those who knew the story understood how close it had come to being something else entirely, a symbol of division instead. It remained a shared space, not because of rules, but because people learned when to speak, when to listen, and when to step back. The lake did not belong to the loudest. Voice had belonged to those willing to protect it quietly, and that understanding finally felt permanent. Another season turned, and with it came new faces. A few homes near the lake changed hands, and the people who moved in carried fresh expectations. They admired the view, the quiet mornings, the way the water caught the light. Some asked questions. Others simply enjoyed what was there. The man uphill paid attention to how newcomers learned the place. He noticed who listened and who assumed. He did not correct every misunderstanding. He waited to see what kind of neighbors they would become. One weekend, small problems surfaced. A group set up a large gathering near the shore. Nothing harmful at first. Music played louder than usual. Vehicles were parked too close to the water. Trash bins filled faster than expected. By evening, the shoreline looked strained. People watched, unsure what to do. In the past, this kind of moment might have sparked arguments or calls to authority. This time, something different happened. A few neighbors approached the group calmly. They explained how the lake worked, how runoff affected the water, how small actions could have lasting effects. The group listened. They apologized. They cleaned up. No signs were needed. The man uphill observed from a distance and felt a quiet satisfaction. Not because rules were followed, but because understanding had taken root. Later that week, he met with the person he had been training. They reviewed logs, discussed recent changes, and walked the dam together. The younger person asked thoughtful questions and made careful notes. The man answered each one. He spoke about balance, about how control without care leads to damage, about how patience can prevent conflict before it begins. The lesson was simple, but not easy. As summer approached, the lake became busier. Boats moved slowly across the water. Families gathered under shade. Mornings were quiet again, filled with familiar routines. One afternoon, a reporter contacted the town office, asking about the lake. They had heard bits and pieces of the story and wanted details. The office reached out to the man uphill. He declined to be interviewed. He suggested they speak to the records instead. The reporter did. They found clear documentation, public statements, and a calm timeline of events. When the story was finally written, it focused less on conflict and more on cooperation. It passed quietly. That was the best outcome. The HOA read the article, shared it internally. Some members felt uncomfortable seeing their earlier actions described so plainly. Others felt grateful that the situation had not ended worse. The board took another step. They added an orientation note for new residents. It explained the lake's history in simple terms. It explained shared responsibility. It avoided blame. It emphasized respect. New residents read it. Some even asked questions afterward. That curiosity mattered. As months passed, the lake continued to teach lessons without speaking. After heavy rain, water moved as expected. During dry spells, levels adjusted smoothly. Each change reinforced trust. The man uphill found himself stepping back more often. He allowed the younger person to handle routine checks. He watched quietly, ready to step in if needed, but mostly content to observe. One evening, they stood together by the dam. The younger person asked what he feared most during the conflict. He answered honestly. He said he feared people would stop listening to each other. He feared pride would harden into something unmovable. He said water can break stone over time, but stubbornness breaks communities much faster. The younger person nodded, understanding more than words could explain. As the year drew toward its end, a simple tradition began. Once a season, neighbors gathered near the lake to clean paths, check benches, and share food. No planning committee. No authority. Just shared care. The man uphill attended. The first one quietly. He helped move a fallen branch, and then stepped aside. Watching others take responsibility felt better than holding it alone. The lake reflected the sky again. Unchanged and steady, it did not remember the conflict, but the people did, and that memory guided them toward something better, not ownership, but stewardship. That difference made all the difference.